recording to Christian.
I've opened it up.
Okay.
We are going to wait just a few minutes, everyone, and give everyone time to get logged in and settled down, and then we will begin.
Silent anticipation.
Should we go ahead? Or give it another minute or two? Good afternoon, and thank you for attending the Arts in the Library's virtual festival. Today's session is it possible? Designing the costumes for Cinderella. As a reminder, you may submit questions throughout this session, and we will answer them at the end of the presentation. We'll get to as many of them as time permits. Meredith Mcgoon is a senior lecturer in the Department of Communications and Theater Arts. She holds an MFA in Costume Design 2011 from Carnegie Mellon University. She has designed for theater, TV, and film. ODU senior lecturer Meredith Mcgoon takes an in-depth look at ODU Theater's production of Cinderella, which will open this Friday, March 25th, and runs through April 3rd. This presentation will explore the costume design and the importance and how costuming affects the audience's interpretation of a production. Without further ado, it is my pleasure to introduce Meredith Mcgoon, I'm sorry.
It's all right, Helene. Thank you for having me join you all. I'm so glad to be here. My name is Meredith Mcgoon, and I'm a professional costume designer and the senior lecturer of costume design at ODU. And so is it possible designing Cinderella's costumes? We're going to take a look at what I have done so far to get us where we are, which is in our final dress rehearsal is this evening, and the show opens on Friday. So here we go. Let's see if I can get my slides cut. All right, Cinderella is done in collaboration with the Dean School of Music. So we're including the Dean Opera and the Dean Choir and Orchestra as part of this production. So there's a lot of moving pieces and parts and groups of people involved. Originally, I was going to be presenting to you about Virginia Opera Company's costume shop Bibles, which are housed in the library at ODU. And unfortunately, I got buried in the design of Cinderella and was unable to put that together. But then I figured I could tell you about Cinderella, which is done with opera, and you can see some of my costume Bible, and maybe it's close enough. So hopefully you enjoy this. All right, thank you. So when we talk about the beginning design process, it always starts with research, which is also where the connection for costumes and libraries are closely linked, right? I spend a lot of time looking through tech books, a variety of art books, fashion history books, catalogs, online catalogs, access to museum digital collections, looking at things like extant garments from the time period, and those kinds of things in order to get inspired to create a visual world of the costumes. So our production of Cinderella, we inherited part of a set that was already halfway built because of COVID. There was going to actually be the Governor's School of the Arts opera was going to be doing Cinderella the opera, and they had this set and it didn't happen due to COVID restrictions and was canceled. So we inherited this set at ODU and we thought, well, great, we have a set, let's do Cinderella. But we decided not to do the opera because we are a theater program, not an opera program. So sorry and rude. And we ended up doing Rodgers and Hammerstein's Cinderella, which is different than the Disney Cinderella movie that some of you might be really familiar with, that we all grew up with. So I have, a challenge of dealing with sort of people's perceptions of what they think Cinderella should be and look like. And I'm given this set that I have to already work with. And I have to start somewhere with my design process. I like to come up with sort of 3 key words about my design that help me focus in on what I'm trying to say, right? So in this case, the inherited set had a lot of blue in it and was very Art Nouveau aesthetics. So I had to sort of deal with that in and of itself and include that. The Art Nouveau art movement started in the 1890s and went all the way through to the 1930s. The height of it and the sort of wheelhouse is like 1900 to 1910 approximately. So that aesthetic, I started looking at fairy tales because Cinderella is a fairy tale. And I looked at how fairy tales were portrayed during the Art Nouveau time period to see like maybe I could find some inspiration of going in that direction. So I started looking at garments, and here you can see some images of garments that I did and found, and then also looking at how Cinderella could be seen in an Art Nouveau aesthetic. And here you can see some embroidery patches with an Art Nouveau aesthetic, which I thought was kind of interesting and cool. These are some of my research images of Art Nouveau inspired fairy tales from the time period. And I'm going to move quickly because we have movement happening and distractions. I apologize for that. But here you can see also just the curly, sinewy aesthetics of the Art Nouveau movement being applied to fairy tales and Cinderella. So this was part of my inspiration and research. I then also looked at kind of where can we go with this feelings and these moments. And what I found in these research images that I was looking for was that they often went and sort of romanticized medieval, fairy tales, princes and dragons and knights. And fortunately for us, the musical also happens to have princes, dragons, and knights. And I was like, great. So then I started to also look at how have we looked at medieval in like quotations and sort of the romantic idealized fairy tale world, and that's how we get to sort of some of these images which inspired the costume choices that were being made. And looking at collections of peasants on stage, because there's like a village filled with villagers and they sing The Prince is Giving a Ball. Right. Then I start doing renderings and sketching out my ideas. Rodgers and Hammerstein's Cinderella is very famous for its on-stage magic. And so part of the rough draft project was me drafting out and figuring out how we're going to create this stage magic, which I will talk more about. So Ella is Cinderella, right? And she's called Cinderella because she gets covered in ashes from sitting by the fireplace. Cinderella, right? She has one transformation that's pretty famous where she transforms from her rags peasant look to a beautiful silver gown, right? And her fairy godmother. And I do research where I find images that represent the aesthetic and the look I'm going for each individual character. And then I also create some renderings. These renderings are actually digital renderings that I drew on my iPad with an app called Procreate. And I actually used photographs of the actual actors to help me draw the images so that my renderings look like more like what they will actually be like on stage. Here's just another example of some of the renderings that I did for Ella with photographs of fabric swatches of what I think materials should be made out of. Marie is the fairy godmother, and she, you know, reveals herself as a fairy godmother, and she's got to be spectacular and fun and exciting to be seen. We have Madame, who's the evil stepmother, and you know, she's a very jealous and insecure woman, and behaves very badly. Charlotte is her stepdaughter, who is also kind of, you know, fair of face but ugly underneath, right? And kind of ridiculous. Gabrielle is the other stepsister. And so here are just a bunch of examples of the renderings that I've done for the characters. We have our princely prince, and he needed to be, you know, princely. And because of Disney and our understanding of and romanticizing of like knights and princesses and, you know, dragons and queens, we have a lot of visual aesthetics already in place telling us what those people have to look like. So I just kind of found and researched and played on that played that up a little bit here. So there's kind of an example of that. Sebastian is an advisor to the prince, who's kind of the evil character here. So, and she's being played by a woman in this cast, which is unusual. And but it kind of I got at her, you know, the sort of villainous aesthetic. Jean-Michel is a character. He's the romantic rebel, upper middle class revolutionist who's trying to make changes in the kingdom. And so I did all of these renderings and to come up with the ideas of what the costumes were going to look like, but then I had to get the costumes, right? And in order to get the costumes, a couple of things had to happen. We borrowed costumes locally from a variety of sources, including William and Mary, the Governor's School of the Arts, and some other theater companies in the area, as well as what we had in stock ourselves. And when you do a show that's this large, there's the cast is 32, somewhere around there. You have to pull a lot of costumes because it's always good, just like when you go shopping, to have like more than one option of pair of jeans when you try on jeans, right? You need to have a couple options for each actor to make sure that you like really get the right costume and the right fit. So one of the things that we ended up doing is going to New York City. In New York City, there is a costume rental house called Tdf Costume Collection. And you can see, here's a picture of it. It's in the basement of the Kaufman Astoria Studios, which is a studio lot like Universal Studios lot out in Hollywood is a lot where they film and they make television and movies and things like that on this studio. And it's located in Astoria, Queens in New York City. And I took a fellow student who's doing an independent study with me this semester, Kara McCormick, and we went to New York and we pulled, you can see 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. I think there's one bag missing in that photo. I think it's 7 bags total. Those are called rice bags. They're really huge and really heavy. Bags of costumes to rent for the show, so that we had enough to dress the entire ensemble, because the ensemble, they play more than one part, right? So they're peasants in one scene, and then they go to the ball in another scene, and then there's a second ball that's a banquet. So that has to happen. While that's happening simultaneously, we're doing fittings and creating the world. We do alterations of things that are pre-made. So here's a photo of one of our coachmen who is as a raccoon that gets turned into one of the coachmen for the magical pumpkin, and you can see she's getting fitted there. Here we have a photograph of a student, Haley Johnson, who is in the process of draping Marie, the fairy godmother's real trained skirt that she wears as the fairy godmother. And actually, Haley draped, which is a process that we literally drape fabric on a dress form in the dimensions in order to figure out the shapes that are needed to create whatever garment we're making for an actor. And here you can see she's in the process of draping this skirt. And she made the fairy godmother's skirt and this really beautiful neck piece that she wears that you can see on top of the dress form there. And she also helped with the bodice and corset of the fairy godmother as well. Here are some more fitting photos you can see in my costume shop. On the left-hand side of my screen in the gold dress, that's Ella being played by Ava. And so she's trying on her gold dress. In the middle is Haley doing a fitting of what's called a mock-up. Mock-ups are usually made out of muslin, which is like an inexpensive off-white cotton material that we use and because it's off-white, we can draw on it and like take notes and things like that when we do our fittings. And fitting Brandy, who is playing Marie, the fairy godmother. And then in the far right is a picture of me trying on a dress for our poor stepsister, Layla, who plays Charlotte. And it is clearly not fitting, which happens sometimes. We pull something and we think, oh, this is going to be perfect and it's the right measurements and everything. And then nope. In this case, whoever that dress was made for originally had very thin arms. So there's some images of how we do our fitting process and create all of the costumes. All of these fitting photos and the notes on the fitting photos and the information of where we got the costumes and what materials we are using to build the costumes, or where we borrowed the costumes from, or what size an actress is or is not. All of that information is housed in our Bible, a costume Bible, and each show I work on gets a costume Bible. We're moving more towards these being digitalized more 100%. I'm not quite there. I still really like having like paper measurement sheets in front of me and like places where I can like write notes and things like that. But now all of my costume fitting notes and photographs get housed in a virtual Bible, if you will, for each show. And this Bible, because it essentially is all of the ingredients that you would need to create that one production. So the information of what the cast is and their measurements, the renderings, the all those components that need to go into that, fitting photos, fitting notes, rental information. Once I was working on a show that required harnesses because we were flying actors in the air. All the harness information was housed in this Bible. And I always tell my students that your Bible should have all the information in it, as if like if you were to get hit by a bus and somebody else needed to step in and take over your job, that they would have all the necessary information and ingredients to cook your show, right? And to make your show. So the Virginia Opera Bibles that are housed in the ODU library also have all of those informations. They include also the copies of renderings that the costume designer did, just like the ones that I just showed you are. So anyway, I just wanted you to see that moment. Another component of the creation of these costumes, because there's a lot of moving pieces and parts, is collaboration. And it's important that the costumes be not only beautiful, but once again, look like they belong in the world of the scenic design and the scenery around us, right? That they're being surrounded in the world of the play, the stage itself, right? Because the audience comes in, you sit down and you watch the show unveil itself in front of you, and you have to believe that that world is real and that it's there and complete. And one of the ways we do that is by collaboration between the scenery and the costumes. And here is just a little example of one of the collaborations moments that we did. There is a tapestry that hangs in the air of the throne room for Prince Topher and his kingdom, and we created, and the scenic designer created this tapestry with like the coat of arms for his kingdom. And I thought, well, we have a bunch of knights and soldiers and heralds and livery, I can never say that word, livery necessary. So why don't I take that heraldry that the scenic designer already created and put it actually on the costumes. And because we are a teaching institution and this is a teaching program, here's a quick video of me showing and teaching Karan Kumar, who is the assistant costume designer and works in my costume shop, how to do a silk screen. This silk screen I created using a method called drawing fluid. So the horse image that you see there, I actually hand painted onto the screen first in order to make the screen. And then the screen is a fine mesh silk.
At
And
a 45-degree
where the horse
angle,
is, it's like
nice
a
heavy
hole.
push.
Sorry, we're theater nerds, so we're listening to
Go ahead,
musicals in the
Thompson.
background of the video.
Yeah, there you go. Now look carefully. How proud are you?
Very. So there you can just see the process of how a silk screen is pulled. The sort of parts that the paint goes through is actually a very fine mesh screen, and the squeegee forces a thin layer of ink through the screen. The red that you see is acting as like a filler, a resist that fills all the holes, so the paint can only go through the areas where there's no red. And this is how we are going to have that horse transferred onto all of the tabards for the knights and what have you. Yep. Okay, and this brings us to the most complicated component of the show, at least for costumes. And that is that Ella goes through two pretty major magical transformations on stage. The first one, I'm going to leave a little bit of a secret. There are lots of videos online that you can go look up of Cinderella transformation dresses and go see them. Or you can come see our show and be surprised at how I did them. But the second transformation dress, I am going to show you how we do it. So in the script, Topher decides to have a ball to try and get Ella to show up so that he can find out who she is, because he's so enamored with her. And so she does, but she doesn't have an invitation to the banquet. And so her stepsister, Gabrielle, says, I'll pretend I'm sick and not go to the ball, and then you can wear my ball gown and go to the banquet. And Cinderella's like, great, I'll wear your dress and we'll play this like little trick behind my Madame, the stepmother. But then Madame returns unexpectedly and finds Ella in Gabrielle's dress. And then she rips the dress on stage and says, you can't go to the banquet. Rip, 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 rip. And then Ella starts crying. And Marie, the fairy godmother, shows up and says, don't you worry, let me transform these rags into a beautiful gold dress for you. And then magically, Ella is in a gold dress. So what you're seeing here are some pictures of how we get this done. And the picture on the far left is a close-up of the center front of the dress. The dress is actually rigged with magnets. And there are magnets around the waist and down the center front of the dress. So the dress closes kind of like a bathrobe. And she's got the gold dress on underneath. So that's the first part. The second part of the dress is that the magnets are also around her waist. And in the picture on the right, you can see the backstage photograph of what it looks like behind the scenes, with these, what we call them, the petals, hung up on and ready for her to get set into it, because it's a quick change that she's got to get into this dress, and then it's magically quick changed out of it on stage. So we wrap these petals around the waistband. So this is what Madame pulls and rips off of her. And they are magnets on the waist. So the whole thing, she spins around and these petals get ripped off, revealing sort of a pre-ripped bottom looking dress underneath. And then the middle photograph is me in a fitting where we're testing to see if she can get it done. Now, this is a rehearsal and this is just a test run, so it's not the most beautiful, and we did some fine tuning in order to get it perfect. But here you can see, ready? And that's the idea of her stepping away from the dress, right? And you can see we do a lot of practices for them, and we rehearse it, right? In the same way that actors go to rehearsal to practice their lines and their blocking, and singing, and so that they get all the components, we also have to rehearse these changes for the costumes. And here we go. All right, so this is putting it all together. So we have all the components finally coming together. My research has produced these costumes on stage. We've done all these fittings and alterations, and we've made things from scratch and built things specifically for the show. We've rented and pulled and borrowed and begged and stolen things from all over the place. And we finally bring it all together, and this is shot during a dress rehearsal. So once again, it's not perfect, and we still are figuring out some tweaks, but this is Brandy and Ava, so Marie and Ella, and their magic dress transformation.
More tatters! Ha! More tatters! Rags, rags, rags! Shattered and tattered and bags, make the new from old. Tatters the matters in rags, and spin them into the gold! Ha! 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 Now, place these rags in your bag. Now I must remind you, the magic is gone at midnight. Yes, the magic is gone at midnight. Is there anything else?
And that is how the transformation will be happening on stage. So in order to get us to that point, this represents somewhere in the realm of, I'm gonna say, 200 to 300 hours worth of labor, not just with these dresses, but for all of the costumes that you will see if you come and see the performance, but also including the amount of research and work, trips to New York, pulling, and all of this. So I just want to say thank you, and I hope that this is inspiring. And insert shameless plug here, come see Cinderella. It starts on Friday and runs all the way through till April 4th, and there are Sunday matinees at 2 p.m. And it is 100% family friendly, and there's all kinds of magic, including dragons and pumpkins that turn into carriages.
Thank you, Meredith, for that incredible presentation. We have some questions.
Oh, good.
Let's see. First off, I happen to know how many people there are. There are 30 people on stage, 9 named characters, 8 ensemble actors, and 13 chorus members. Do you have a sense of the total number of costumes that you have created, begged, borrowed, and stolen?
It's somewhere between 85 and 90 costumes. We've kept it under 100, which is actually pretty impressive.
It may be impressive to make it that small, but it's also impressive that there are that many costumes,
Yeah,
of which you have made happen.
It is a lot of work and many sleepless nights.
And we're not quite there yet.
We're almost there. So close.
One question we have is, what is the biggest challenge you've had during this whole process?
So one of the largest challenges actually was the fact that, because we're still not quite done with COVID, right? And COVID protocols are really challenging, and every place is a little different. So right now it was about finding enough costumes for the ensemble became really challenging because a lot of places right now are just simply not letting people borrow or rent costumes because of COVID protocols. And we're limiting the number of sort of exposure and access that we're having. So it was difficult actually to just get the sheer amount of volume and costumes that we needed. In order for you to understand what 88 costumes looks like, those costumes, if we were to hang them all up, you would need a pipe that was somewhere around 20 feet long in order to hang up all of the costumes, right? If you drive a small compact SUV like I do, you would need to put the seats down, and then the costumes would fill the entire back and you would not be able to see out the back. I know this for a fact.
Helene, Meredith, it looks like we have a question on our chat, and this is from Kate Mattingly. Thank you for a fantastic presentation. I love that you start with research and shared your research and creation process in this presentation. Since I always admire your designs when I go to ODU productions, I wonder if you could talk about how during your research process, you are not only about reflecting what kinds of designs have been associated with certain shows and characters, but also taking into consideration how to update roles. Does this make sense? In other words, how do your designs contribute to a narrative and also challenge stereotypes? And then follow up more. Yeah, this is a question.
Yeah, I see the question here. Okay,
yeah.
So costume designers, our job, and this is I'm teaching an intro to production design class, and we just started talking about costume design. So costume designers' jobs, we deal in stereotypes, which is unfortunate and also fortunate. So what we have is to understand is what do costume designers do? And costume designers are translators of the secret language of clothing. And we act as mediators, and we have an actor's body on stage, and we are going to then transform this actor into this character, and we're going to do it through clothing. And we understand that the audience is going to look at this person and make certain assumptions about who they are when we see them on stage, right? This means that you have to include understandings of sociology, politics, right? Who our audience is, what audience are we performing for, and how are they going to interpret and translate what we've shown them on stage. Now, I'm not a mind reader, but I can take some good guesses. In order to take those guesses, I need to always have my fingers on sort of the zeitgeist of now, right? Like I need to know what people are saying and thinking and how we communicate with clothing, with our body language, with each other, because my job is to interpret that all and put it on stage. This production of Cinderella is a more modern adaptation. So things have already been added to it and changed to take it away from the original Rodgers and Hammerstein production, right, is from the 1960s. Originally, it was a television production. And, the Cinderella story of like poor lost girl meets prince and he rescues her is a little sad and, trite, and perhaps doesn't land as lovingly with today's audiences as it would in the past. Fortunately, the Rodgers and Hammerstein people have updated the script. And so the script is updated. That's where we actually get Jean-Michel. He is Gabrielle, the nice stepsister's love interest, and he's a revolutionary who wants to change the kingdom for good. And Sebastian is sort of the evil advisor who is like, taking all the money from the poor. And so there's a little Robin Hood fairy tale that gets put in there. And, fairy tales can act as, a good vehicle for metaphors and life lessons that still sort of resonate today. When I do my designs, I look at all of those, right? I think of all of the components, and I always ask myself, why this play now? And what is this play about? And what are we telling the story for? And then also looking at like who my actors are, what bodies they have, and how I can dress them and make them feel their best on stage, particularly given the current climate. A lot of my non design based research is looking at bodies on stage and performance, and the stereotypes of sizeism, and the acceptance of variations in size and diversity on stage and how that can look. So it's always really important to me. I have a very fat liberatist pedagogy that I weave throughout all of my design process to make sure that nobody is ever feels less than. So although I have the fun photo of like Layla not fitting into her dress, like I would never, for example, be like, something's wrong with Layla for that not fitting in the dress, right? Something's wrong with the dress. That's not the right dress for her. Find her the right dress, right? In terms of having students of color on stage, I think that it's really important that we always ask ourselves, how are we understanding our relationship to race and to to this character, as well as to the audience, and that we look at things like, if we are putting one person of color in a role, what are we saying about that through the lens of our understanding of racial dynamics in the now, the current now, right? And when I have questions, a lot of times some of those conversations end up happening with a director, right? Being like, what choices are we making and why? So it's a great question, Kate. Thank you.
And as the very last question that
Oh, and I'm
Kate
never
asked,
involved in casting.
are you involved in the casting shows?
Never. The show gets cast, and then I get handed a cast, and you say, you must solve the problem. Like, how do you solve the problem? Like Maria, you must solve the problem right now with the cast that you're given. There are times when I have pushed back, where I have looked at a casting choice that a director has made, and I have gone to that director and said, I don't know if you're making the right choice. I don't know if you're telling the story you want to be telling. You're certainly not telling a story I want to be telling with this choice, which then, of course, can ruffle feathers. And usually that's, usually it's just, I want to say obtuseness. There's a moment where we just didn't think like, oh, I never would have seen it that way because I didn't see it that way. And I'm like, well, by casting this character in that role, you're saying something about that person's body, that person's race, that person's gender, or gender expression that perhaps maybe you weren't thinking you were going to say, and maybe we can be concerned about that. But oftentimes I don't really have much to do with that, unfortunately.
Right. So you've mentioned costume Bibles.
Mm-hmm.
Do you have a certain approach or consistency when putting them together? Yeah.
So like I said, the old ones are these huge, thick, 4-inch, 5-inch wide, 3-ring binders. And like you would lug them around everywhere, and you're like, oh, now I keep it on an iPad.
Much easier.
much easier. The more organized your Bible is, the more organized you can be about the show, right? For example, in this picture right now that you're seeing, on the right-hand side is Amaya, and on the left-hand side is Marcus. Both of them have about 8 costume changes throughout the production because they're dancers. So they get featured in a variety of different roles throughout the whole show. And if the Bible wasn't properly set up, then keeping all of Marcus's roles would be difficult in order and what he needs to do and like how to make them so that he can do all the quick changes that he has to have happen and where those happen and what the information is. It would be very difficult. So when you open my Bible, usually I have a cast list on first page, and that's because I'm terrible with names. And I really have a hard time remembering who is playing what role, and what that looks like. So usually there's that. Then usually there's a production calendar is the next section. I love divider tabs. I love getting out my like little P-touch and like labeling my divider tabs. There's a certain ritual of like setting up your Bible for each new show that for a lot of costume designers, it's like, okay, you're going to start the show. You're going to just do like, and you like put this together. I always like make a cover page that's on the front binder of the binder that always I try to like make some kind of image that's in the aesthetic of the world. Or if I have some kind of design metaphor image that like speaks to me of like what the show is really about visually, a lot of times I'll use that to like make the front of my Bible. And so you've got the cast, you've got your production calendar, then usually each actor has its own tab. And then behind each tab for each actor is usually their measurement sheets, renderings. If they have specific research that's unique to their character, those research images go back there. And then once we start doing things like fittings, fitting photos and fitting notes, if things are borrowed, what are they wearing when? I often make an Excel graphic chart that is the entire show where I have like all of the actors each have a line, and then for each page of the script I mark whether or not they're on stage, and then if they are on stage, what character they are or what outfit they're wearing during that moment. So like I can have a visual representation of the flow of the show, and I make this costume chart. There's actually a lot of paperwork that goes into the production, and it's not just simply, oh, I like need this dress, or I'm making this pretty thing, right? And there's a lot of analysis and like I said, a lot of lists. I have a look list that I put together that'll be like Marcus is first playing a package carrier. I think he's a package carrier, and then he's a townsperson, and then he is a fox coachman, and then he's a nobleman at the ball, and then he goes back to being a fox, and then he is a herald, and then he is a banquet guest, and then he's trying on the slipper. And so like, and I like put together a list. So then also when I'm in fittings, I can like check it off and be like, oh, I tried this costume. And all of those lists and documents all live within my Bible. And like I said, now most of this is all in like folders in Google Drive.
I love your renderings, by the way. Have you ever done kind of an exhibit of some of production renderings that you've done in the past?
I have never done one. Thank you very much also for being very kind about my renderings. I have personally never done one for a collection of like my life's work kind of thing. Sometimes what we will do is display the renderings in the lobby of a performance, particular per shows, like or I'll turn this presentation into like slides and run them on like TV screens in the lobby or whatnot, and we'll display them that way. And this gives sort of a dramaturgical behind the scenes, if you will, for actor or for the audience when they come in and have that experience. One time I did a production of a play called Good Kids, which deals with sexual assault and violence on campus. And I did a collaborative project with, this is at a different institution, where we created a display that went up in the library. It also went up in the lobby of the theater as well as the campus university. And we used a production called what were you wearing, which is a physical display of what people were wearing when they were assaulted, and it asks this question, and it's there to challenge the myth of that you deserve what is coming to you because you were wearing a short skirt or whatever, right? And it was a very powerful experience, so that not only students were exposed to it when they were in the student union, but also in the library, and the librarians put together a whole book display, and it was done as part of our sort of Women's Health and Sexual Awareness Month and all this kind of thing. And then that included also copies of my renderings and images of the scenic design and like how we were navigating this entire process. So we've done kind of things like that before. I haven't done one at ODU yet, but I look forward to doing one.
I would love to see that.
Yeah, I think it'd be a great kind of component. Some plays have better opportunities for that kind of dramaturgical presentations than others, right? Because of the content of Good Kids and the conversations that can come around it. So I think we have yet to figure out what our season is going to be for next year. And it took a lot of planning also. It started, we started doing the work for that at this institution I was at. They're on the quarter system. So the quarter before the show even started rehearsing, like we started working on the collaborative process in order to get that display up. Sometimes theater is produced really quickly and you don't have a lot of time. Cinderella, we basically started it at the beginning of the semester, which seems like a while ago, but 50 days to do this is actually very fast. And with spring break in the middle of that, please note that like we lost an entire week because of spring break. And then also doing this, in sort of the second wave of COVID times, I guess you can call that, right? What are we in post-feminist COVID times, I guess? I don't know. Third wave COVID. I don't know. I've lost where we are at. But it's still like, those are still challenges that we're like incorporating, and also like reflexing like our theater muscle. Theater is a lot of work and it's long and exhausting. I haven't left the theater before 1 a.m. in the past 3 weeks. So those are really long hours and it's physically grueling, and you have to be prepared for that. And if you're not, and then you're not. So that's what I've got for you. But at the end result is like so beautiful. And you're talking about the Bibles, and what I should end with is that theater is ephemeral. We don't often, we record them for sort of our own personal archives of the university, but they never really are recorded for public consumption. It's very rare. It's happening more often now, actually, because of COVID. Now we have things like Hamilton is recorded and on Disney Plus, right? But that in and of itself is an astonishing concept and feat that was basically never really done before. And so theater, like if you don't see it live, if you don't go, you miss it. And these Bibles often are like the only relics. You've got production photos. The costumes go back into like warehouses and they get distributed and reused for other things. They get cut up and recycled. They get transformed into other costumes and things like that. And so like how all of the pieces and parts get put together, all that information is only housed in this Bible. And so they're kind of special things, right? And having access to like seeing all my documentation and research, like and a lot of times also the audience doesn't get to see that behind the scenes. You'll see like people sewing things or building a set, but you don't see like the paperwork that it took to get there, right?
Yeah.
I would actually love to put together both the stage manager's Bible and your Bible for literally any show that we have done, and make a display of those paired sometime, anytime. I would love to do that.
Great, that's a great concept. So yeah,
Okay.
thanks, Kate, for liking my renderings. These renderings are fun. They, like I said, I did them on Procreate. They're digital renderings. You know, in ODU is a research, we just got designated research one school, woo, right? So keeping up with my research means I get to like be technologically savvy and have a lot of fun. So it's, you know, a good excuse to buy the newest iPad and get all the coolest stuff and be like, this is part of research. And actually some of the stuff that's coming down the pipelines for costume design is really, really exciting. Things like innovations in 3D scanning in order to take measurements is really astonishing and will radically change how we approach understanding the body. And sometimes measurement taking, right, can be very personal. As a costume designer, my job is to like know somebody's body inside and out, right? Like I know if like one shoulder is a little higher than the other shoulder, or you know, like which boob is bigger than the other boob. Like I know these things. It's my job. These are deeply personal things that like me as a stranger knows about some actor, and it's important to understand, you know, sort of, we call it necessary intimacy of costume design. And using like 3D scanners will actually take away like the need to, I mean, we'll still know and have the knowledge, but the physical nature of that actually, which has its pros and cons. So kind of cool.
I was going to ask with, you know, we're still operating in a pandemic. Based on your most recent experience, can you share some of those limitations and changes when working with actors on stage? You've mentioned about the 3D body scanning that's coming down the pipeline, that, you know, talk about like working intimately with actors.
Intimately, I mean, the industry is really changing right now pretty radically with our understanding and relationships of bodies and sort of in this post-COVID world, right? And so things like having, you know, intimacy training that happens for like directors, but now there's actually intimacy training for costume designers. And how we interact with bodies is, you know, we have to have a level of sort of confidentiality there, right? And sort of that necessary intimacy that has to happen and the rapport that's built there. For COVID kind of protocols, when it first came out, we really like, because no one knew, like we were all like, what, how close can we be? Can we touch each other? So during the actual sort of lockdown and shutdown, the theater program created several pieces, and I did things like if an actor tried on a garment, like I'd give them the garment and be like hanging on a rack, and they'd be in another room, and I would use, you know, like FaceTime or Zoom and like watch them try things on in the other room. And then if they touched the garment, then it like got put on a shelf and then sprayed with disinfectant, right? And we just never touched, and we didn't touch it for 3 days before, like, and then we could go and do the alterations. But then once I touched it for 3 days before, it had to wait before it could go back to the actor, right? Now we know that like transmission is a little different than that, and we're also, you know, ODU, we're fortunate that most of the campus is heavily vaccinated, which is, you know, go ODU for reigning responsibly. And that has allowed for us to sort of go back a little bit more towards normal times, right? But almost all of my actors wore masks while we were doing fittings. It's hard because you can't see their faces, so it's hard to tell if they're like happy or comfortable in their costume. And a lot of times, sometimes actors can be afraid, especially young actors, to tell me like if a costume is or is not working. They're just so afraid that I'm going to be like, well, you have to wear it. And I'm like, no, I need this to work for you, for what you're doing as in your character. And like, it needs to be like, you're the one wearing it, not me. So tell me if it's working. And sometimes like that conversation, like it's through their body language, and it's the masks of course makes that harder to see and understand. So you kind of have to be like, please tell me, no, like, and you have to have lots of conversations about, is this working? Can you do your dance piece? Is it fitting you? Are you uncomfortable with showing that much skin or being that covered up? Or, you know, do you have terrible eczema on your hands that's causing things to rub? And is this fabric rubbing you the wrong way and it's going to cause you to bleed on stage? You know, I mean, these are the things that we run into as costume designers and have to have those conversations with our actors about. And so my costume shop is always a safe space. It's very sort of clearly stated, and, you know, safe space training and that kind of thing. It's because I'm just like, you know, I find out, I see and find out things about people that you wouldn't normally. The joke is, right, doctors and costume designers are the only people who are like, hello, nice to meet you, take off your pants. So.
And Helene did share the link to the ODU arts ticks. So, yep. Thank you, Helene.
And thank you, Kate, for getting a ticket already. Yay! I need to get mine.
All right. If there are, and she's very excited. If there are no more questions, we'll go ahead, wrap it up. It looks like we're getting close to time. So we will wrap it up. So thank you, Meredith.
Oh, you're so welcome.
Thank you so much. And to all of you for joining us this afternoon. I am going to share the link to the Arts in the Library's virtual festival website. So please check that out and register for the rest of the presentations that we have this week. There are lots more in there. There are innovative performances, virtual and physical exhibits, and some virtual tours. So please check it out. So up next is, please join us again tomorrow, Thursday at 2 p.m. for Dr. Robert Witowicz's presentation on the art scene in Hampton Roads 200 years ago. And thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you all.
Thank you.
Do I need to exit?